All right, this is going to be American History Unit 1, Lecture 6. This is going to be PowerPoint slide presentation number 2 for Chapter 3. The title of the lecture is Notable Events and New Ideas Shape the Colony. All right, notable events in colonial America. 1691, after years of conflict, the king issues a new charter for the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he requires more religious tolerance of the Puritans, and it weakens political power of the Puritans. If you remember, obviously the Puritans were persecuted over in Europe and came over to the colonies, but when they got over the colonies, then they started to be strict themselves, hence why Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson were eventually kicked out of the Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay colony area. In 1692, the Salem witch trials occur. This was hysteria and wild accusations of witchcraft and became a neighbor versus neighbor land grab. These were false accusations and kind of was based on religious extremism, kind of what I talked about. If it wasn't that they were accusing them of witchcraft, it was that they, neighbor versus neighbor they didn't really agree upon how the Bible should be read or how, religion should be practiced at that time. And executions of innocent people did happen. A lot of it was women being accused, but there was also men, and this further erodes Puritanism and kind of the whole religious base, surrounding the Puritans. People lost a lot of faith in that denomination. All right, another notable event that happened in colonial America in 1734, there was something called the Zanger Trial. So Zanger was a gentleman that was a writer for a local colony newspaper, and he was accused of libel and for criticizing a royal governor. So what libel is, and if you kind of remember back to your civics and economics days, libel and slander. So libel is actually written down lies. So if someone writes something in a newspaper that damages someone's character, and that that the stuff written down, people find out that it's not actually true, then the person can actually be sued for libel. Okay, so same thing with slander. So slander is spoken lies. So if you spread lies about somebody that hurts their character, you can actually be sued. So obviously, back in these days, this would be in the form of newspapers. Okay. Well, they found out that he was innocent because what he printed was true. It's just that the royal governor or the royal governor's people surrounding him did not like what he wrote about him, so they obviously tried to throw him in jail. So this would establish the precedent of the freedom of the press later on in the United States, okay, or in America. But remember, we're still talking about the colonial time period. We also see the growth of major cities along the East Coast: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Charleston. Cities face early challenges, including fire, sanitation issues. And we also see the founding of the first universities over in colonial America at the time. Harvard was founded in 1636, Yale in 1701, and Princeton in 1746. Harvard and Yale, I do believe they are located in Massachusetts. Princeton is actually located in New Jersey. Another university that's actually very close to where we live right now will eventually be established as well, William and Mary. And these colleges or these universities started out as training Puritan ministers, but their curriculum changes to reflect more intellectual movements of the time, and we'll get into that here in the next few slides. So, new ideas shaped the colonies. So, this is kind of a throwback to world history, talking about the Enlightenment. So, we definitely need to know what the Enlightenment is. So, the Enlightenment was an intellectual movement that emphasized the use of reason and scientific method in order to gain knowledge. And the gentleman on the right, his name was John Locke. He was an Enlightenment thinker. And John Locke said, all people are born with certain rights that cannot be taken away. Okay, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit. So those rights that he was talking about, Locke's three rights, were life, liberty, and property. So this surrounds what Locke later wrote about as a social contract. So the social contract is the basis of modern democracy. And what it says is that the government only has power because the people have given it power. And it is the job of the government is to protect the rights of the people. So how does the people give government power? Well, the simplest or more basic way that they do is by voting. Okay, so obviously our modern democracy here in the United States is based upon voting. All right, you can vote people in, the president, representatives, senators. Okay, at the federal level, obviously, and if you don't like the job that they're doing, you can, and they're not holding up their end of the bargain, then you can vote them out. Okay, so that's what he was talking about here. Another Enlightenment thinker was Benjamin Franklin, probably one of the greatest in the colonies at the time, and then obviously will be influential in establishing the United States of America. He was a scientist, writer, and also a political thinker. All right, so another big thing that happens, and not only in the colonies but in Europe as well, was the Great Awakening. So this was a period of religious revivals that happened in the 1730s and 1740s, and we see new denominations form. Okay, so uh, the Enlightenment thought appealed to the intellectuals. Okay, but the Great Awakening appealed to more common people. Okay, so the Great Awakening was a religious revival. Okay, you see new denominations um, like Presbyterians, obviously Baptists. You have Calvinists. You have Methodists. Okay, you have different denominations form underneath this umbrella of Christianity. So seem to be odds, but have a similar effect. Okay, so meaning have a similar effect as like the Enlightenment is. So the Great Awakening seemed to have, some people at odds with each other, but had a similar effect. So what the Great Awakening did, as well as the Enlightenment, is that it allowed the common people to challenge established authority. And right now, the established authority in the colonies would be like the royal governor, okay, and the royal governor is under the authority of the king or queen at the time, okay. So that's who they're established, or who they're challenging, who the people of the colonies are going to be obviously challenging eventually. And there's a lot of emphasis on the individual, okay. And they start to question Britain's traditional authority of how Britain is doing things. And we'll see this come up here a little bit later on, getting into the American Revolution next chapter, but that's kind of where we're headed here. As far as the Great Awakening goes, Jonathan Edwards was a minister who drove the Great Awakening in America or in the American colonies with his fiery sermons. One of his most famous was called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." All right, so he was a kind of a key figure in the Great Awakening time period. So, in conclusion, okay, the colonies are very prosperous. Okay, the reason that they're prosperous, if you go back to the last PowerPoint slide we did, salutary neglect. Okay, the British government is not enforcing those strict navigation acts upon the colonies, so they are selling their goods to other countries in Europe. Okay, the population is growing. All right. Enlightenment ideas are changing the way people think about government. And then the Great Awakening is changing the face of American religion. And these movements and economic motives are uniting the colonies in new ways.